Huzzah! So good to be here again. And one thing I have to say, as a patriot, I'm kind of stressing out. I stress out over things that you guys probably don't stress out about. For example, about 10 years ago, we got a British director to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And he was going to build the new American wing of art. Wonderful addition. And so his name, I believe, was Malcolm Rogers, Oxford, Christchurch College. And then he chose a London firm to build the American wing, Foster and somebody. And so when I went to see the wing, I was prepared as a patriot not to like it. Why, we have a Brit in charge of Paul Revere's silver and all of the great portraits from that era of Paul Revere, Sam Adams, etc. Oh, this is some kind of historical blasphemy and treason. So I went, and unfortunately what I found is probably, I've traveled around the world to over 50 countries, probably the best museum ever. It puts the old part of the museum to shame. It is perfect in perfect Federalist colors. And it's not just that era. Each floor is a different era in American art. He did such a wonderful job, and the architects from London, it's just perfect. The only thing that bothers me, I wish a Yank had done it. I wish an American had done that. So that was the first thing. And now we have a British Lord at Camp Constitution. Oh my goodness. Yes. So the globe may or may not be warming, but down in Hades, they're passing out ice skates. It has frozen over. A British Lord at Camp Constitution, and what a brilliant speech he gave. I watched it on YouTube, tribute to our Constitution. And currently, we patriots in all countries are fighting our battles within our countries, just for decent family values and, against the violent left. And they really have become violent. So today, what I'm going to talk about is our union. And Lord Monckton closed his speech with a wonderful quote from Longfellow: "Sail on, O ship of state, sail on, O Union, proud and great." So why does he know what the Union is and none of us do? Or actually, a lot of folks in the Patriot movement, they know quite a bit about freedom. They don't know what the Union is. So I'm going to tell you what it is, why it's important, and how it is attacked. So first of all, the Union is, it's the stars on our flag. That's called the Union right there. And it is also the states together. It is our territory from sea to shining sea. And it is we the people as one people. It is all of those things. It's also an old-fashioned name for America, the Union. And in our Constitution, of course, the preamble starts, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. So could everyone open to their constitutions? And Lord Monckton opened his speech with questioning why did they come together? A great question, and make this Constitution. And it tells us why, in order to form a more perfect union. So what are all the things that we did in order to form a more perfect union? Does anybody have their preamble? We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. What are all the things that we're going to try to do with this document? Hello? Anybody got the Constitution? Yes. Speak up. Establish justice. Ensure the blessings of liberty. Yes, that's right. Provide for the common defense. Yes. How did we provide for the common defense in days of yore? The Second Amendment, right? The first clause of the Second Amendment. The militia clause. It's the only thing that the founders said was really necessary, that we should keep this militia together. It wasn't a bunch of ragtag farmers that beat the Brits, the best army in the world. It was a bunch of skilled militiamen who had a 150-year tradition. That was unfortunately wiped out in 1903 with the Dick Act. We no longer really have that militia. That was part of our union too. It was part of what brought us together, is All American men were expected to bear arms and expected to have militia training, you know, to know how to do things like go from a line of march to a line of battle. I don't know how to do that. But so we really don't have that anymore. That was one of the attacks on our Union. So what else? Okay, our flag. One of the things that unite us. Okay, so let me ask a question. Why do we put our hand over our heart when we say the Pledge of Allegiance or sing the national anthem? Anybody know? Somebody take a guess. Yes. Yes. America ultimately, you look at a map and it seems like it's out there. It ultimately lives in our hearts. That's where it lives, in the hearts of patriots, right? And to the extent that it lives in our hearts, then America lives. To the extent that it doesn't, that we take it for granted, those borders don't mean anything. And we've seen that they haven't meant much of anything either. You know, when we have over 30 million illegal aliens in our country, and that affects our Union. We don't have proper immigration, naturalization. We let over 1 million in a year legally, properly. That's a very high number. That's a very generous number. And then what happens is, over time, they become Americans. No matter where they're from, you know, within a few years, you can identify them as a Yank. They kind of feel like we do. And when that process is totally overlooked, then that affects our Union. Now, it's interesting. I know with Brexit, Britain's trying to get out of the European Union. What other union did they try to get us into? If we don't have this union, they got other unions for us. Does anybody know what it was called? The John Birch Society played a big part in making sure we didn't join it. What was it called? The North American Union. Anybody heard of the North American Union? Emily, I know you have. Your dad worked on that. Yes. Nathaniel, absolutely. What was the North American Union? It was a plan like the European Union to merge Mexico, United States, and Canada, to harmonize our laws and to phase out the borders. While that was never properly ratified, what happened was it was sort of phased in and the border was phased out. And English was phased out as a language. By the way, I'm very glad we won our War of Independence and we won the Second War of Independence. Otherwise, we would all be speaking English right now. None of you got that. We would all be speaking English if we lost that. Winston Churchill called us two peoples divided by a common language. So, anyway. So, yeah. So, all right. So, our freedoms, our liberties are attacked in so many different ways. Well, basically, George Washington and the founders gave us two assignments as we the people. By the way, taking a look at that, who's in charge here? If you're from outer space, from Pluto, and I say, okay, who's in charge?
We, the people.
Yes. We the people. We what people? Who's got the Constitution? Or what people are we talking about? Yes. We the people of the United States. Americans. Right? And what did George Washington say about that? Wonderful quote. He said, "The name American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exact the just pride of patriotism more than any other appellation derived from local discrimination." So we think of ourselves first and foremost as Americans. Every cop in every city in America has an American flag on their arm, and they take an oath to the American Constitution. And George Washington called our Union the Palladium. He says that you should cherish a cordial, habitual, and immovable attachment to it. Think unity, think one as Americans, and so forth. Accustoming yourselves to think and speak of it as the palladium of your political safety and prosperity. Palladium, that's a very good word. I think there's a venue in London called the London Palladium. Not too sure. Does anybody know what that means? A palladium is a sacred object having the power to preserve a city or nation possessing it. A safeguard that can guarantee the integrity of social institutions. The Bill of Rights is one of those. So it's interesting, if you go to the Tower of London, they have ravens. That's one of their palladiums, and they have to have those ravens stay there in the tower, otherwise it's bad luck. In Thailand, they have a little emerald Buddha. It's about yay high, and that's their palladium. No, they dress it for the season. They dress up the Buddha. You know, if it's hot like this, they dress it for hot weather. And when I was there, there was a British gentleman with a camcorder back then, and he took a picture of it. You weren't allowed to take a picture of it, and all of a sudden, these armed guards with machine guns escorted him off of the property, because that was their palladium. George Washington says we don't have any physical things like that. Our palladium is our union of oneness. So, okay, our flag, that is another thing. So this flag has a special name. We have a lot of different incarnations of our flag, but okay, so this is a funny thing. So this is called what? Who's awake? What is this called? Say it loud. Union. The stars on our flag are called? The Union. Thank you. It's also called, any corner of a flag like this is called the canton. So our canton is a union. I'll tell you something funny. So a flag on the back of a ship is called an ensign. A flag on the front of the ship is called a jack. Right? And everybody knows the nickname for the British flag is what? The Union Jack. You never heard the Union Jack? Okay. So when this flag, sometimes our Union, this was the flag of Washington's headquarters, was just the stars on a blue field. And he was basically keeping the Union together during that war. So in the Navy, they still have this as a flag in and of itself. They still do. So when this flag, it's the flag of the Union, right? When it's flown on the front of one of our ships, it's called the Union Jack. Ironically, that's what it's called, because a jack's on the front of the ship. Little flag history. Okay, our flag and our anthem are bound together. That's another part of our Union. We sing the national anthem, and it's perhaps ironic that a lot of our anthem is kind of British and you don't know it. The tune to our anthem, la, 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 is a British drinking song called To Anacreon in Heaven. Yes, it is. It was very popular in the day. The song itself, the words of the song were written on the decks of a British warship as they were bombing Fort McHenry in Baltimore. And so a lot of that song is tribute to British munitions. Yes, the rocket's red glare, that was the British Congreve rocket. The bombs bursting midair, those were exploding munitions. They hadn't been perfected yet, so sometimes they would explode ahead of time. But there was no 4th of July, celebration with fireworks that was more impressive than that. The people that watched it from a distance from Baltimore or on the warships, and it was an amazing spectacle, except if you were right underneath it in the fort. And so they had a storm flag, which was a lot bigger than this. But they had a storm flag, which was through the night. And then they had a huge flag, which was made by Mary's Pickersgill. So it's funny, the old Betsy Ross flag, the one with the circle, that's called the Betsy Ross. So I guess they could call this one the Mary Pickersgill. But it was the flag from the time of George Washington, and it's different from our other flags in that it has 15 stars and 15 stripes. So it has a warmer feel to it. It has a longer feel to it because it has more stripes going that way, and it has a red stripe below the Union instead of a white stripe. So it just feels a lot warmer. There are fewer stars, so they can be bigger, and they pop out a bit more. And so this is our Star-Spangled Banner. And how has our flag been attacked? Our flag and our anthem. How has that been attacked lately by the left? Anybody? Anybody watch football? Yeah? Yeah. So guys, how are they attacking the flag these days and the anthem? Speak up, Kalis. Speak aloud. Huzzah!
The players usually kneel down during the national anthem.
Yeah. Why?
Because they don't stand for the flag.
Right. Black Lives Matter. George Soros group, right? All of these attacks on our Union. So Union think united. So of what kind are our attacks on the Union? Our attacks on our liberties are many. What about our Union? There's only one kind of attack on our Union, always has been. What is that? What's the opposite of uniting? To unite and to do the other thing is to divide. Okay, so the method, and this goes back to Roman times, of attacking any group that's together is to divide and conquer. In Britain, I believe it's known as divide and rule. Is that correct? Divide and rule. So, which may be, once you conquer a people, you have to rule them. So it's always divide and conquer. So we're going to divide the American public by, kneeling for the national anthem. And this guy, Colin, you're complaining. I mean, the average football player makes 100 times more than the average American. That's just the average one, 100 times more. Has America really blessed them for playing a stupid game? I mean, I enjoy football, but they are very, very blessed. If anybody should be standing up and saluting the flag, it should be all those football players. And the Patriots tried that once. They had one kneel. They didn't do it all year. And I'm a big New England Patriots fan. I wish that more of us were real New England Patriots. We'd take the country back pretty quick instead of just football fans. But I sent them a postcard so everybody could read it. And I said, you're not the Patriots anymore. If you can't stand up for the flag, you're the New England traitors now, and just get out, just leave. And I guess a lot of other people sent them hate mail, and they stopped doing that. They only did it once. They took a team vote, and they said, we're going to stand for the flag from there. Now, okay, so the NFL, Roger Goodell, I think they were in on it last year. They were it's hard to tell, but they went along with it. And Roger Goodell might not believe in Almighty God, but he believes in the almighty dollar. And they had a sudden 20% loss of viewers and revenues. So they said, this year we're going to make a policy that people stand up. So they had no patriotic convictions, but they lost some money. And so now they do stand for that. So America basically said, if you can't stand for the flag, then we can't stand you. And so why is that? Now, why is this a good thing? Why is this? It's sort of funny. In the Ron Paul revolution, we're trying to wake people up and they won't wake up. That's human nature, right? We take things for granted. We take the flag for granted. We take the anthem for granted. Okay, they're singing the anthem before the baseball game. We got enough time to go make the TV dinner and come back. But then all of a sudden, they're not singing the anthem. Makes people think, right? And so people are starting to think about that. Why aren't they singing the anthem? And that's good. And now out on the streets you have these Antifa, these anti-fascist marches. And they had one where in Portland and Berkeley. And there was a Chinese woman in Berkeley that was a witness. And she said, you know what this is like? This is like the Cultural Revolution. I lived through the Cultural Revolution in Mao's China. And that's the tactic that they use. They come after you and they just hurl violent insult after violent insult at you, and you eventually start to cower. And that's what's happening here, unfortunately. So so we have two assignments. We have to keep it free, and we have to keep it together, united together. We have to do that. Washington, so we got to do both of those. So, all righty. When I was traveling around the world, it's sort of funny. Sometimes, it was during all of the revolutions of 1989, Freedom Revolution. So sometimes I was respected as Americans in Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe, not so much. You're the Yank, and American under their breath. And I would always say, American and will, when I would hear that to myself. So the word American has the words I can. We can and will do it. And how did I get around the world? I did it on $17,000. I traveled very well. I got a lot of great souvenirs. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about freedom. I read a book before I left called The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. And yes, he knows how to wheel and deal. So I remember when I was in Egypt, right? And I was in the bazaar in Cairo. And they saw me and they said, where are you from? America. America, good country. Figuring he could charge me double. Most Americans aren't good at wheeling and dealing. So by the time I struck the bargain, he looked at me, he says, British! You British! He wouldn't believe I was American because the British are much better at bargaining. They're much better travelers than we are. I hate to say they travel a lot more. Most of the people I was traveling with were from Britain or the Commonwealth. So, now looking back at your Constitution. So, somebody read the top lines for me again. Somebody with a loud voice. Who's going to read? Who's a super camper here? Yes. Where's the super camper? Come on. Step up and read the beginning of our preamble. Yeah, all right. Say it loud.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union.
More perfect than what? Stop. More perfect than what?
We're under the Articles.
Very good. Very good. Yes, more perfect than what came before. So under the Articles, it starts with the states, with a list of the states. And it has been said here that we were kind of like 13 different countries. To the extent that we were different countries, we fought like different countries. You know, we had border wars. We had currency wars. We had instability within our states. Terrible instability. What happened 30 miles east of here? A guy named Daniel Shays. 30 miles east of here. Yeah. Shays Rebellion. Guy named Daniel Shays, he was a patriot from the American Revolution. And what happened? They fell into debt. A lot of the farmers fell into debt during a brief depression. And they couldn't get justice here in Massachusetts. And there were no higher courts. So, you know, they seized the right of arms and the right of revolution. And they were going to march and burn Boston down. Is Mr. Shirtliff here? Hal? No? Okay. So for a lot of us that have had battles in the Massachusetts State House, that seems like a good idea sometimes. Not that we would ever do that, but I can sympathize with Daniel Shays. For example, in our State House, they just had one of these red flag rules where if anybody in your family, any ex-girlfriend, ex-roommate says you're a danger, like maybe you wear a tricorn hat or something, they can just come and knock on your door and take away your gun, no due process. That's a law now here in Massachusetts. So I sympathize with Daniel Shays, but the other thing is British ships were dominating our ports again. We couldn't enforce trade, we couldn't enforce tariffs. So we needed a national government, and we needed to think of ourselves more as one people. And so that's why it starts as we the people. Okay. So what is that union? It goes back before our certainly our war for independence. You think of the Great Awakening, and that is when there were preachers moving up and down through all the colonies. The English preacher George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, who preached near here at Northampton, he preached something called "The Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." And by the time he was done preaching, you know, you were so scared of hell that people would like lift their feet off the floor because the floor was starting to get very, very hot. And he was actually cast out of his congregation, Jonathan Edwards was. But so we started to think of ourselves more as one people. I think America started, basically when the British people started to read the Bible, when they began to actually read it. And you had the Puritans that came over here, right? And the Mayflower Compact. And anyway, so we have as Americans, I think, a closer, from my travels, a closer individual relationship with God, with praying with God. No matter what sect we are from, we really have that. And it's interesting, if you go back to George Washington's time, he was first in war, first in peace, first in war, first in peace. Anybody? First in the hearts of his countrymen. Very, very good. So, but George Washington wasn't trying to be like George Washington. Everybody else might have. Who do you think George Washington was trying to be like? Well, here's the prayer of George Washington. Direct my thoughts, words, and work. Wash away my sins in the immaculate blood of the Lamb, and purge my heart in thy Holy Spirit from the dross of my natural corruption, that I may with more freedom of mind and liberty, and will serve thee, the everlasting God, in righteousness and holiness this day and all the days of my life. Increase my faith and sweet promises of the gospel. Give me repentance from dead works. Pardon my wanderings. Direct my thoughts to thyself, God of my salvation. Teach me how to live in thy fear, labor in thy service, and to ever run in the ways of the commandments. Make me always watchful over my heart, that neither the terrors of conscience, the loathing of holy duties, the love of sin, nor an unwillingness to depart this life may cast me into spiritual slumber, but daily frame me more and more into the likeness of thy Son. Who's his son? Jesus. George Washington was trying to conform to the likeness of Christ. There's so many self-help books. Christianity really is not about helping yourself. It's about ultimately self-denial and to try to conform to the likeness of Jesus Christ. Something we can never achieve, but we should always aspire to, and that was what George Washington was doing. And that's one way we're united as Americans, is in our love of God. And if you look at the left, if you look at political correctness, what is this term now? If you say something that's offensive, what do they call that? Say something that's offensive to any group. They want to divide people into groups. That's called what? What type of speech?
Hate speech.
Hate speech, yeah. So what do you think the ultimate hate speech is? Yeah? The Bible. And this was actually challenged as hate speech in Canada. And according to Canadian law, the Bible sort of is hate speech, and so it went up through, because it defines a certain morality that is not the same morality as the left that's in charge there. And it went up through the courts, but the final judge, he knew that it would cause too much controversy, so even though it read like hate speech, they said it wasn't hate speech, but Christ said, remember, if they hate you, they hated me first. Okay, so I could bore you guys about how political correctness started in Frankfurt, Germany. It was in England. It is in England. They tried it out there first. When I was your age, I used to watch 60 Minutes, and there was a piece called The Loony Left, and it was about how people were rewriting storybooks and things in London. And I looked at that and I said, wow, they're really crazy. It's a good thing that'll never happen here. It did. We're in the midst of it now. So they call that critical theory, and critical theory, basically, they criticize everything until it's mush, our founders. So, yes, our founders did not get the job done with slavery. They debated it very vigorously. They tried hard at both the Constitutional Convention and at the Declaration of Independence. They tried hard to get rid of it. What did they do to get rid of it in the Constitutional Convention? They decided at 1808 there would be no more importation of slaves, and they would try to phase it out over time. Didn't succeed there, unfortunately, but they tried because they were trying to form a more perfect union. Okay, so, but basically, it's a divide and conquer thing. So if you go to college now, you'll see women's studies, black studies, Muslim studies, and then if you're not for militant Islam, you're given labels, Islamophobic. So they basically, it's a divide and conquer thing. As you don't think of yourself as proud Americans, women, you think of yourselves as an oppressed class. Blacks, an oppressed class. Muslims, an oppressed class. As a white guy, I'm thankful because I'm not considered an oppressed class. You just got to throw it all at me, and whatever happens, good or bad in my life, I have to take responsibility for it. I can't blame it on anybody else. I guess that's the one good thing about that. So, all right. So Hillary Clinton, actually at Wellesley, she did her thesis on a guy by the name of Saul Alinsky. Anybody ever heard of him? Yes. So she really admired Saul Alinsky. I am so thankful. Thank you, Lord, that Hillary Clinton is not our president. Oh my goodness. Whoa. I say that prayer of thanks. You thought Obama was bad. But there again, human nature, it's funny. We take stuff for granted. Who do you think was probably the best president for the Second Amendment in terms of new people coming to patriotism and gun ownership in this country? Who do you think led the way? Yeah? I mean recently. I would say, now this is going to sound ironic, Barack Obama was great for the Second Amendment. He was so good for the Second Amendment because people realized, I better buy it now because they're going to take it away. And especially when it looked like Hillary was going to win, gun sales skyrocketed. And studies show that once people do own guns, then they start to understand patriotism and our Constitution and what, the safeguards on that right. And so anyway, does anybody know who makes guns right down the street in Springfield? Yes.
I forgot his name.
Smith and Wesson. Yeah, there's a great Clint Eastwood scene where he walks into, a robbery, He says, "You boys put those guns down. You don't think we're going to let you get out of here, do you?" He says, "Who is we, sucker?" Smith, Wesson, and me. Great scene, sudden impact. And then it follows up with, and then the guy's like, he's about to reach, and he's like, Clint's like, "Go ahead, make my day." And then Ronald Reagan said that too. So, anyway, how much time do I have left? I don't have a clock. Anybody?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, good. Got a little bit more. So, one of my criticisms on our own side is some of anarcho-libertarians around the Ron Paul Revolution. They don't have a concept of a country like our union. They just see things between a sovereign citizen versus government, and that's it. So our country is our government. And I just want to give you an interesting example of somebody that didn't think that way, and that was Boris Pasternak. Does that name ring a bell? Anybody? Boris Pasternak. Boris Pasternak was a writer in Russia, and he saw it taken over by the Soviets. And actually, a friend of mine who's part Russian just went back to Russia, and they're having sort of like a renaissance. They're discussing, the origins of what happened there 100 years ago when they killed all the czars. Terrible crime. The Tsar was trying to modernize and have a constitutional monarchy, and the Bolsheviks they killed him and his family. They even put a bayonet to their little dog, Jimmy. Yeah. It's funny, doesn't it bother you sometimes when people do mean things to animals, even more than people? That bothers me sometimes. But anyway, so Pasternak saw all of this stuff happen to Russia. The communists took over, and he eventually won the the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he refused to get the prize because if he were to accept that prize, he would have to leave Russia. He loved his country so much, even though it had been totally taken over. There was more to Russia than just the government that took it over. And I've been there too, and I thought that. I saw that in 1989. I saw how many Christians there were. I couldn't believe it. And I was like, "You believe in God?" And they said, "Yeah." I mean, they really had a very strong faith, and that was just when they were going back to church then. So, so Boris Pasternak, but then a lot of people in America, actually on our side, they just see, and it's important to be able to see that, the individual of we the people and the government and how it's attacking us, but America's more than just the government. And it's our territory, it's our cultures, our folkways, rock and roll that the Brits kind of took over with their British invasion, but it's so many great things. How many people have driven across America? Yeah. You have fun? You go to a lot of national parks and stuff? Yeah, if you haven't, it's a wonderful thing to do. And so what else? So, yes, another thing that is American is the idea of a national economy. And this comes up, briefly, Lord Monckton talked about the tea. And we in Boston dumped 90,000 pounds of tea in the harbor. Now, do you think it was just because the Yanks were a little bit like penny pinching and they just couldn't pay a little bit more for the tea? No, it wasn't. So the tea actually was cheaper. Even after the tax, the tea was cheaper than it had been before because the British East India Company was given a tax break and kind of a monopoly so that the American importers like John Hancock could not compete, basically. And so it's an idea of a national economy and not government-granted, and it was globalism. It was early globalism. The East India Company, the Crown, the part of the City of London, it's a globalist enterprise. It still is, and a lot of localities suffer. So the alarm, it was a pamphlet, and it didn't say "Beware King George, beware the King's troops." It said "Beware the East India Company," and how it was affecting the American economy. And it also talked about the East India Company over in India and the effects on India, and that could happen here. So this idea of a national trade, so we started with tariffs, and a lot of the real anarcho-libertarians, they never met a tax that they liked. I understand that, but the founders set up the tariffs so we could make things, we could have factories, and we could compete, and that worked out very well. There was another Texan billionaire 25 years ago that warned us what would happen once we got rid of those tariffs with NAFTA and GATT. Do anybody remember his name? He's a feisty little guy like this. Texans have a way with words. Yeah. He said, I can hear a giant job-sucking sound. A giant job-sucking sound. And he said, this is what's going to happen to y'all. It's going to happen to our factories and everything. And people thought he was a little crazy, but 25 years later, we've lost 60,000 factories and 7 million high-paying jobs. So Donald Trump comes in, and he's trying to basically rebuild a national economy. So part of our union is America First, a national economy. And I'm going to close with a little of the inaugural address of Donald Trump. And he understands really we the people and that he is our servant like no one I've ever seen. I mean, I'll get emotional. I didn't think it was possible to have a patriot like that as president. I'm very cynical, but I pray for him every day. We, the citizens of America, are now joined in a great national effort to rebuild our country and restore its promise for all our people. Today's ceremony, however, has a very special meaning, because today we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another, from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people. For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while people have borne the cost. Washington has flourished, but the people did not share the wealth. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left, and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of the country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families across the land. That all changes starting right here, right now. Because this moment is your moment, it belongs to you. It belongs to everyone gathered here today, everyone watching across America. This is your day, this is your celebration, and this, the United States of America, is your country. That is such a strong statement of union. Thank you. Somebody remember what I'm teaching here. Oh my goodness, it's the heat, right? January 20th, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation once again. We are one nation, and their pain is our pain. Their dreams are our dreams. Their success will be our success. We share one heart, one home, one glorious destiny. We've defended other nations' borders while refusing to defend our own. We've made other countries rich while the wealth, strength, and competence of our own country has disappeared over the horizon. That's globalism. That goes back to the East India Company, the City of London. One by one, the factories shuttered and left our shores, with not even a thought about the millions upon millions of American workers left behind. We will bring back our jobs, we will bring back our borders, we will bring back our wealth, and we will bring back our dreams. That's pretty powerful. Thank you very much. Any questions?